I have a friend who lives his life inside a spreadsheet. I mean that literally. His 5-year career plan is mapped out to the quarter, his finances are projected into his retirement, and his romantic life is a separate tab with milestones for engagement and children. He navigates his world with a calm confidence, a man safely inside a fortress of certainty he built himself from color-coded cells and formulas. And then last Tuesday, the company he planned to be a vice president at by 2028 was acquired. His entire department was eliminated. Just like that, his fortress crumbled. A decade of meticulous planning vanished in a single 2-paragraph email. I called him a few days later, expecting to hear devastation. And he's shaken, for sure. But what I actually heard in his voice was something else, something I hadn't heard in years, curiosity. He said, "It's terrifying, but for the first time since college, I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to do tomorrow." And he said it not with despair, but with a strange, quiet hint of relief. That moment, that flash of freedom found in the wreckage of a perfect plan, got me thinking. We spend so much of our lives trying to architect the future, to eliminate every variable. But what if the most meaningful parts of our existence can only grow in the spaces we didn't plan for?
Yeah, that story really hits it, doesn't it? That is the core conflict, isn't it? You know, this profound human desire we all have for stability, for a predictable path.
Right, the spreadsheet life.
Exactly. And it just keeps hitting this wall of constant, radical disruption. It doesn't matter if you're, an individual trying to map out a career like your friend, or some huge multinational corporation trying to plot out the next quarter's profit.
The game has changed.
Completely. The era of that meticulous, long-term, really rigid plan, it's functionally over. I mean, our sources really back this up. They show the only viable path forward now, and this is for both organizations and individuals, is to basically ditch that old planning mindset,
right,
and embrace something much more adaptive, much more experimental.
Absolutely. That idea that you can somehow build walls high enough to insulate yourself from everything outside, or even, like you said, your own changing feelings or desires.
It's just an illusion.
Yeah. It's an illusion now. My friend's story, it feels like a perfect little snapshot of this massive global shift that's happening.
Precisely. So, okay, our mission today is really to unpack how to make that shift. We're going to do a deep dive into the strategies, the actual practical stuff from people and organizations who really thrive in the unknown.
Okay.
From startups that almost seem to run on chaos, to leaders who actively cultivate resilience, and also to individuals who've managed these huge, radical career changes.
So we're pulling out the practical strategies.
Exactly. We're extracting practical strategies, looking at how they cultivate this culture of, letting life unfold, prioritizing adaptive strategies, iterative learning, instead of those rigid plans, especially when things are volatile.
Okay, so let's start by grounding this, the scale of the disruption. It's not just, one person's bad luck. It's systemic, right? Especially for organizations that just can't pivot fast enough. How big is the actual cost of being too rigid in the corporate world?
Oh, the data is pretty staggering. And it really highlights just how fragile that idea of organizational certainty actually is. Think about this. Between the year 2000 and 2017, less than 2 decades,
right?
52%. 52% of the companies listed in the Fortune 500 were either acquired, went bankrupt, or just, poof, ceased to exist.
Wait, hold on. 52%. So basically a coin flip for survival for Fortune 500 companies.
Over 17 years, yeah.
Wow. That really suggests that even for the biggest, most established players, stability is it. Well, it's kind of a myth they've been telling themselves. That's an enormous cost.
It really proves a fundamental truth, doesn't it? That today's challenges demand that leaders adapt faster than their competitors, and often, faster than their own customers, or even changing. The organizations that disappeared during that time, they were fundamentally rigid. Either they couldn't see the disruption coming, or maybe worse, they saw it and actively chose to ignore it because, they were comfortable, too comfortable with their existing success.
Okay, so when we talk about disruption, we need to be clear. It's not just like a rival coming out with a slightly better product.
No, it's more fundamental.
Right. Our sources seem to break these big shifts down into, 3 distinct types. Let's start with the one companies maybe have the most control over. Willful disruption.
Okay, yeah, willful disruption. This is the category where you find things like innovation, competition, and also deliberate reinvention. It's often an intentional move to shake up or displace an existing market.
Like the classic example.
Uber, right.
Yeah.
Disrupting the whole traditional taxi business model. They just made getting a car more convenient, maybe a bit cheaper, all through an app. They deliberately attacked that established way of doing things.
But, the version of this that seems even more fascinating and probably more painful internally is when a company disrupts itself.
Oh, absolutely. That's probably the hardest kind of leadership decision, right? Sacrificing something that's making you good money today because you have the foresight to see it won't survive tomorrow.
Apple comes to mind.
Apple is the classic case study. They essentially cannibalized their own incredibly successful iPod line, which was a huge moneymaker, by launching the iPhone.
Right, which seemed crazy at the time to some people.
Totally. But they had the foresight, and maybe more importantly, the internal guts, to make their own profitable product basically obsolete. And in doing so, they created this whole new dominant category with the smartphone. That decision must have required overcoming, immense internal resistance, financial anxiety, all of it.
Okay. Now, the second type, serendipitous disruption. This feels much less planned, more like luck.
Well, by definition, it is less intentional.
Yeah.
It happens when circumstances just sort of unexpectedly line up perfectly with a product or service that maybe was already out there, perhaps just humming along quietly or even struggling a bit.
History's full of those, right? Like Post-it notes.
Exactly. The Post-it note came from a failed attempt at a super strong glue. Or think about penicillin. The product or the potential was there, just waiting for the right context, the right moment to align.
And the huge recent example everyone experienced
is Zoom, right. Zoom was around, it was an established player in video conferencing, but then the pandemic hit, creating these perfect, completely unexpected circumstances, and they were able to capitalize because they already had an affordable, easy-to-use product, and crucially, they had the organizational agility to scale up incredibly fast to meet that sudden, massive global demand, almost overnight.
So serendipity plus agility.
That's the formula. Serendipity provided the opportunity, agility allowed them to seize it and achieve market dominance.
Okay, and the final type, natural disruption. This is the stuff that's completely out of anyone's control and often, the most devastating.
Yeah, these are the big forces, environmental, biological, geopolitical.
Right.
COVID-19 is, again, the obvious, massive example. It fundamentally changed consumer behavior, wrecked supply chains, altered how and where work gets done globally.
But it's not just pandemics.
No, absolutely not. We also see this clearly with climate change, right?
Yeah.
Affecting resource availability, making certain regions less viable for business, changing insurance models. These are huge external forces. But regardless of the type of disruption, willful, serendipitous, natural, the key message for leaders is the same. Just trying to cope isn't enough anymore. You have to learn to adapt and ideally thrive.
Which brings us neatly to this core idea of adaptive leadership. When everything feels unscripted, what actually defines a leader who can still navigate effectively?
Adaptive leadership, fundamentally, it's like an improvisational art form. The researchers Hafitz and Linsky, they put it really well. They said, you might be guided by a vision, sure, but what you actually do from moment to moment cannot be scripted.
You have to react.
You have to respond continuously as things unfold, which demands, flexibility, creativity, and honestly, a profound willingness to take calculated risks and then really learn from what happens next, good or bad.
And crucially, it seems adaptive leaders focus on the right kind of problem. There's this important distinction we need to make between a technical problem and an adaptive challenge.
Oh, that distinction is absolutely vital. Yeah. A technical problem is something you can fix with existing know-how, existing expertise, or resources you already have.
Like fixing a software bug.
Exactly. Or improving efficiency on a manufacturing line. You hire an expert or use your internal experts, they apply a known solution, problem solved.
Very pretty.
But an adaptive challenge, that's different. It requires a change in people's actual values, their beliefs, maybe their roles, relationships, or even just their day-to-day habits.
So the answer isn't obvious.
Right. The solution isn't sitting on a shelf somewhere. It only emerges through trying things, through experimentation, and through learning as you go.
Okay, can you give us a concrete example of that difference?
Sure. Let's say a company's sales are declining. The technical problem might seem to be, we just need a better marketing campaign.
Right.
Hire a new agency, spend more money. But the adaptive challenge might be realizing, wait a minute, Our entire internal culture is actually built around protecting our old legacy product lines, and we fundamentally resist launching the new digital services our customers are clearly demanding now.
Okay.
You can't fix that culture problem with a new ad campaign. You have to change deeply embedded behaviors, values, maybe even power structures. Adaptive leadership is about spotting that deeper adaptive need and then mobilizing people to actually tackle it, even though it's uncomfortable and the path isn't clear.
So it's really about culture change, much more than quick fixes. What are the sort of key elements then, the components of adaptive leadership that we pulled up?
Okay, so first, like we just said, identifying and really addressing that underlying adaptive challenge, not just the surface symptoms. Second, mobilizing people, engaging them, empowering them to collaborate effectively on solving something that's inherently fuzzy and undefined. Third, continuous experimentation and learning, treating every single attempt, whether it succeeds or fails, as vital data, not judging, just learning. Fourth is reflection, stepping back, looking at the progress, and adjusting the strategies based on what you've learned.
Okay.
And finally, fifth, actively building resilience, improving the capacity of both the individuals and the organization as a whole to absorb these shocks and actually emerge stronger. And this means leaders have to constantly challenge their own biases and the organization's baked-in assumptions.
That shift, though, from being the expert with the answers to being more like an improviser, that sounds incredibly demanding.
Yeah.
Especially when you're right in the middle of a crisis. Is there some kind of tactical framework leaders can use to keep some structure while still adapting on the fly?
Yes, there is. And it's helpful. Our sources kind of condense a practical approach into what they call the 4 A's of crisis response. It's a framework designed to maintain action and accountability even when things feel chaotic. It starts with anticipation.
Okay, anticipation. What does active anticipation look like when the market's going crazy?
Well, it's about strategic thinking, right? It's trying to identify potential shifts in the market and social trends, new technologies proactively, and not just reacting when they hit you. It means dedicating real resources, not just lip service, to horizon scanning.
So looking further out.
Yeah. For example, anticipating a potential regulatory change or seeing a shift in generational consumer preferences long before they become urgent problems. And honestly, this really requires cognitive diversity in your leadership team. You need people who think differently to spot different signals.
Okay, so anticipation first. The second A is articulation. Communicating that potential future.
Precisely. Articulating those anticipated needs, those potential challenges, is critical. You have to communicate clearly, frequently, to build understanding and get people across different departments working together. During a crisis, ambiguity just breeds mistrust and speeds up panic. Leaders need to clearly articulate the adaptive challenge they think they're facing and the steps they plan to take, even if those steps are just, initial experiments or provisional moves.
Got it. Then comes adaptation itself. The doing part.
This is the execution phase, yeah. The continuous learning, making the necessary adjustments as new information flows in. This is where the organization actively tests its hypotheses, learns, and pivots based on the results.
Okay. And the final A.
Accountability. This is the structure that keeps the whole process honest, really. It involves transparency in how decisions are made and a genuine openness to feedback, especially feedback that's critical of the current adaptive strategy.
So accountability means being transparent about the failures too, not just spinning the successes.
Exactly. That's crucial. When you can stand up in front of your team and say, okay, we tried this experiment, it didn't work out the way we hoped, here's what we learned, and here's how that learning is going to inform our next attempt or next pivot. When you do that, you reinforce the adaptive culture. You build trust. These 4 elements together, anticipate, articulate, adapt, accountable. They provide a necessary structure for navigating immediate chaos without falling back into those rigid, outdated plans that got companies into trouble in the first place.
Okay, so if a big organization uses the 4 A's to kind of manage chaos, let's pivot now to the startup world, which seems like an environment that's almost structurally built on chaos, right?
That's a good way to put it.
We often lump startups together with, small or medium-sized businesses, SMEs.
Yeah.
But the source material draws a really critical distinction there, especially around uncertainty.
Yeah, and that distinction is really the heart of it. SMEs, your typical small or medium business, they generally prioritize stability, right? Sustainable growth, often slower growth, and they usually operate within markets they already know pretty well. A startup, though, it's not just a small company. The key definition is that it's a temporary organization designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. And the crucial part is, under conditions of extreme uncertainty.
That phrase seems key. conditions of extreme uncertainty.
Yeah.
So if your market, your product, maybe even who your customer is, if all that is basically unproven, then your main goal can't be perfect execution of a plan.
Exactly. It has to be learning. That's the fundamental difference in their operating logic. Because their business models are inherently unproven, startups just cannot rely on those detailed multi-year business plans that an SME might find useful. The risk of complete market failure is just too high.
So how do they manage that risk?
They mitigate it not by trying to plan the uncertainty away, because you can't, but by operationalizing adaptation. That means deliberately shortening product development cycles, running experiments, and discovering if the whole thing is viable as quickly and cheaply as possible. Their core imperative is iterative learning and adaptive strategies.
Okay. And this whole search process, this operationalizing of learning, it's kind of codified in the lean startup methodology, right? What are the basic ideas behind that approach?
Right. The lean startup methodology, which Eric Ries really popularized, it's this powerful mix. It blends techniques from customer development with principles borrowed from lean manufacturing. The main goal is to emphasize continuous innovation and, crucially, customer feedback over just the founder's intuition or some big, detailed upfront plan.
And it's built for speed and failure.
Well, it's built to enable rapid recovery from failures,
Right.
yeah. Much more so than traditional sort of waterfall development methods where you plan everything out for months or years and then have a big launch. Lean startup anticipates you'll be wrong sometimes, maybe often.
That comparison to lean manufacturing is interesting, where the focus is on cutting waste and making physical things. What does lean mean when you're talking about developing a new product or service?
So in lean manufacturing, yeah, any use of resources, time, money, materials for anything other than creating value for the end customer is considered waste, period. The lean startup applies that exact same intense focus on eliminating waste, but applies it to the development process itself. It means you don't waste months and millions building features that it turns out nobody actually wants, all based on your initial assumptions.
Right. Avoid the big bet until you have some proof.
Exactly. You avoid those huge initial funding requirements, those expensive all-or-nothing product launches that older models relied on. The philosophy is, if you are going to fail, you want to fail small, fail fast, and fail cheap. Learn quickly, adjust, try again.
Okay, which brings us to probably the most famous tool from Lean Startup, the MVP, the minimum viable product. How exactly is that defined, and why is the emphasis on validated learning so critical?
Right. The MVP, it's often misunderstood. The definition is, the MVP is that version of a new product, which allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the least effort.
Okay, so the focus is squarely on learning, not just having a basic product.
Precisely. It's not about the minimum features. It's about the minimum effort to learn something crucial. And validated learning means proving, or just as importantly, disproving your fundamental business hypotheses. What Ries calls your leap of faith assumptions. You need to test these with real customer data, not just argue about them in a meeting room.
Okay, can you walk us through a really good example of someone using minimal effort to test the absolute biggest make-or-break assumption? The story of Nick Swinmurn, the founder of Zappos, seems perfect here.
Oh, it's the textbook example. It really is. Swinmurn's entire idea for Zappos rested on one huge, really risky leap of faith assumption back in the late 90s. Would people actually be willing to buy shoes online without trying them on first?
Which sounds normal now, but back then.
Back then, yeah, people were still pretty hesitant about e-commerce generally, let alone for something like shoes where fit is everything. So traditional business logic would have said, okay, first, spend a year building a massive inventory system, get millions in venture capital, build a complicated warehouse and fulfillment center, launch a perfect bells and whistles website.
Right. The big upfront investment.
Exactly. Swinmurn totally rejected that logic. Instead of spending millions based on an unproven assumption, he took the lean approach. His MVP was incredibly simple. He went to local shoe stores in his area.
Physically went to stores.
Yep. Asked the owners if he could take pictures of their inventory. Then he posted those pictures on a very basic website. He didn't own any shoes, had no inventory.
Wow. Okay.
Only after a customer actually placed an order online did Swinmurn go back to the store, buy the shoes himself at full retail price, and then pack them up and ship them to the customer.
So his initial experiment cost him, what, maybe the price of developing some photos and his time?
Yeah.
He must have lost money on each sale.
Oh, definitely lost money on every single transaction. But making a profit wasn't the goal of that initial MVP. The goal was purely to test the core hypothesis. Will people buy shoes online?
And he got his answer.
He got validated learning. He successfully proved that, yes, customers were willing. That single piece of real-world data, that proof of customer willingness, was worth infinitely more than any beautifully crafted business plan full of unproven projections. That simple, low-cost MVP process laid the foundation for Zappos to eventually become a billion-dollar company.
That kind of super fast iteration, that constant adaptation, it seems like it needs a specific kind of internal culture to support it. We often hear the term agile development. What does that really mean for how a team works day to day if they're trying to operate this lean, adaptive way?
Yeah, agile development is kind of the operational rhythm that makes the adaptive mindset work in practice. It generally means breaking down big, complex projects into much smaller, more manageable tasks or features.
Yeah.
These smaller tasks are then executed over short, focused periods, often called sprints, maybe lasting just 2 to 4 weeks. And then, crucially, at the end of each sprint, the team reviews the actual working product or feature they built.
Gets feedback.
Gets real feedback, ideally from customers or users, incorporates that learning, and then immediately pivots or adjusts the plan for the next sprint. It forces this constant feedback loop.
So it forces teams to confront reality very quickly, rather than going down a wrong path for months.
Exactly. The cultural requirement here is really 2 things. First, you need the discipline to actually keep those feedback cycles short and stick to the process. Second, and maybe even more importantly, you need a mindset across the team that's genuinely built to recover from failures. Startups don't see failure as some kind of disaster to be hidden.
They see it as data.
They see it as necessary data. Information required for the next adaptation, the next pivot. They're just in this relentless pursuit of finding product market fit, finding that sweet spot where the product truly resonates with customers. And they let real customer data, not the founder's ego or some outdated plan, guide that search.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about how organizations need to adapt. But let's shift the focus now more to the individual level. When people face disruption, maybe getting laid off like my friend, or maybe just realizing, I'm deeply unhappy in my current job, the common advice is often to, stop everything, go on a retreat, do some deep soul searching to find your true self.
Right. The quest for the authentic self.
Yeah. But our sources seem to suggest that this intense focus on finding some hidden, singular identity might actually be the wrong approach when it comes to making a successful career change.
That's a really critical insight, yeah. The traditional view, that limiting idea of identity as this sort of fixed, hidden core, just waiting to be discovered, it honestly doesn't map well onto how people actually navigate successful career reinvention in the real world.
So what's the alternative view?
The alternative view is that our working identity isn't static at all. It's much more dynamic. It's like a configuration of many possibilities. Some are established parts of who we are now. Some are aspirational things we'd like to be. Some might only exist as vague dreams right now.
Okay.
So changing careers isn't really about finding one true identity and swapping it for another. It's more of a process where we actively reconfigure that whole set of possibilities. We experiment, we try things on.
And the key to unlocking that reconfiguration seems to be prioritizing action over just sitting and thinking.
Precisely. Successful career changes seem to hinge much less on knowing your inner truth right at the beginning and far more on prioritizing action and experimentation. You need to get out there and gather real-world data about what actually resonates with you, what fits, and maybe just as importantly, what doesn't.
Which means we probably need to ditch that old metaphor of the career path.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We really need to abandon that limiting metaphor of the career ladder. The ladder implies this very narrow, linear, strictly upward movement. And if the ladder breaks, well, you fall.
Right.
Instead, the sources suggest a much more generative metaphor. View your career as a work of art. Imagine a huge, complex painting. From a distance, you see this coherent whole picture, right? But if you get up close...
You see all the individual strokes.
Exactly. You see hundreds, maybe thousands of separate, expansive, sometimes seemingly erratic brushstrokes, each one made independently.
Okay, so the goal isn't necessarily that relentless upward climb on the ladder. The goal is just making the next thoughtful, intentional stroke on your personal canvas.
That's a great way to put it. Changing careers means making these expansive, independent movements, these brushstrokes, that incrementally, over time, reveal the whole picture. Often, you only see how it all fits together in retrospect. And the guiding principle for making those strokes shouldn't be a rigid plan, but curiosity.
That idea of curiosity as the guide? The journey of Zainab Ghadiali, really illustrates how powerful that can be, even when the path looks completely nonlinear from the outside.
Oh, her path is amazing because it totally defies any kind of linear logic. I mean, she went from studying chemistry in Mumbai to learning Chinese acupuncture in Berlin, then shifted into doing public health work in places like Peru and Nicaragua, before eventually landing as a product lead at tech giants like Facebook and later Airbnb.
If you just looked at her resume without context, you might think, what is going on here?
Right, you might think she was completely directionless, but from her perspective, she was simply following these threads of curiosity that pulled her. How do things work? How do health systems operate? How do people interact with technology? That curiosity was her compass.
She also highlights a really key psychological point about making these kinds of leaps into the unknown. We often label it as brave, but her take on bravery is different, isn't it?
Yeah, she points out this common misconception. When people told her, oh, it was so brave of you to go to a new country with hardly any money, she insisted, well, bravery requires fear. And she said she wasn't actually afraid in those moments. She was excited by the possibility.
That's a huge mindset shift.
It is. The necessary belief here seems to be that embracing the unknown should ideally excite you rather than paralyze you with fear. If you're genuinely excited by the possibility of learning something new, of exploring, then the fear of failure tends to take a back seat.
Okay, so if we accept this idea of following curiosity, embracing excitement, how does this transition process actually work in practice? For someone thinking about their career as this evolving work of art, what are the steps?
Well, the transition seems to unfold in roughly 3 key stages, and they're often iterative, meaning you might cycle through them. First is exploring possible selves. This is the brainstorming phase, asking yourself, whom might I become?
So imagining different futures.
Exactly, envisioning different potential versions of yourself, both the positive ones, like, the successful entrepreneur or the fulfilled artist, but also acknowledging the negative or feared selves, like maybe the burned out corporate drone you don't want to become. This stage involves gathering information, talking to people, doing research.
Okay, exploring possibilities. Then comes the crucial step of actually testing them out, right? Gathering data.
That's the second stage. Lingering between identities, this is the indispensable testing period. You have to test out those possible selves you identified, maybe both old ones and new ones, to turn them from just fuzzy ideas into concrete, evaluable options. And crucially, this isn't about quitting your job tomorrow and moving to a mountaintop to meditate.
Right, it's about smaller steps.
It's about setting up low-risk experiments.
This feels like where we bring that lean startup MVP concept down to the individual level.
Yeah.
Crafting personal experiments.
Exactly right. Crafting experiments means implementing small probes, maybe side projects, maybe volunteer work, maybe short courses, to test out different roles or fields on a limited, tangible scale without having to fully commit up front.
Like the example of Professor Ben Forrester.
Yeah, he's a great example. He was a tenured professor interested in possibly pivoting from academia into leading a nonprofit. But he didn't just resign his secure job immediately. That would have been a huge risk. Instead, he started building a portfolio of outside activities related to nonprofits. And then, importantly, he managed to negotiate a 2-year leave of absence from the university to actually go and run a nonprofit startup full-time.
So that 2-year leave was essentially his personal MVP. It was his low-cost provisional test of the hypothesis. Do I actually enjoy the day-to-day reality of running a nonprofit as much as I like the idea of it?
Precisely. It allowed him to immerse himself, test the identity, gather that critical, validated learning about himself and the role. And if it hadn't worked out, if he hated it, his professional identity back in academia was still intact. He could return. This also highlights the real value of variety in these experiments. If you only test one new idea, you risk either missing the thing that's truly the best fit, or maybe you become overly attached to a romanticized version of that one single alternative.
Like the example of Gary McCarthy, who explored becoming a scuba instructor and a wine tour operator. Alongside more traditional corporate roles he was also considering. Why was testing those seemingly wilder options important?
That variety is absolutely crucial for comparison and discrimination. You really need to explore a broad range of options, what the sources sometimes call both conformist, closer to what you do now, and nonconformist, more radical departures, lines of investigation. Gary needed to actually look over the edge of his fantasy career, being a scuba instructor in sunny Hawaii, to see the day-to-day reality of it.
Less glamour, more tank filling.
Maybe. Perhaps realizing he didn't actually want to spend his days scraping barnacles off boats, as the source puts it. Seeing the reality of the fantasy, even briefly, allowed him to discriminate, to say, okay, this part resonates, but that part really doesn't. It brought clarity to his eventual choice of a new corporate role that better suited him overall.
Okay, so you do all this exploring, all this experimenting, but then you're faced with choices. The data might be messy, the options might feel overwhelming. How do you actually decide which path is right when it's so complex?
Yeah, that's where pure, cold rationality often lets us down. We can build all the pros and cons lists and comparison spreadsheets we want, but in these really complex personal choices, the sources strongly suggest we need to submit our intellectual analysis to a compass of the gut.
Trusting your gut, that sounds a bit unscientific.
Yeah. It can sound that way, but the idea isn't to ignore reason. It's that our emotional responses and gut feelings, far from just being noise that interferes with logic, are actually critical inputs for enlightened decision-making. They integrate vast amounts of subtle, maybe subconscious information much faster than our conscious mind can process it all. They help guide us toward choices that feel more authentic or resonant than reason alone might suggest, especially when we're evaluating the real-world alternatives revealed by our experiments.
This whole process, though, it sounds like it requires letting go of some deeply held beliefs or assumptions about ourselves and our careers, which I know from experience in talking to people is often the hardest part. It reminds me of that powerful parable about dropping the rock.
Oh, that parable is so resonant, isn't it? Because it speaks directly to the pain of these self-imposed limitations we carry. The parable describes people floating in the sea, desperately clinging on to these heavy rocks burdens, like maybe the relentless logic of a post-MBA resume that says you must climb a certain ladder.
Or just deep-seated financial fear.
Exactly. Or fear of what others will think. They cling to these rocks even when the weight is clearly causing them to sink, to drown emotionally or professionally. Susan Fontaine, the executive with the MBA mentioned in the source, she really struggled with this.
Tell us more about that relentless logic of a post-MBA CV. What was her rock?
For Susan, it seems her rock was the feeling that she had to follow a very specific linear career path that maximized her financial return and external status, because that's what her prestigious education and background seemed to dictate. It was the expected path. So she kept taking these high-stress, high-status jobs that offered great money and looked good on paper, but she was increasingly ignoring her own growing need for better work-life balance, for more meaning in her work. She was holding on to the rock of her past investment, her pedigree, her sunk costs, really. And the job choices she made based on holding that rock just kept her sinking deeper into burnout.
So what changed for her? How did she drop it?
She only changed when the realization hit her hard. The chronic pain and exhaustion of carrying that rock became greater than the fear or perceived cost of letting it go. She had to admit to herself that she needed a fundamentally different path, even if it didn't fit the logical MBA trajectory. And that's often how it works. You need the experience of the burden, the feeling of sinking, to finally unlearn those deeply ingrained assumptions. You have to feel the pain before you're truly willing to drop the rock.
And finally, there's the social dimension. We can't ignore the people around us. You know that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. That network, your circle, can sometimes become a massive blocker to making a change.
Oh, it's almost impossible to make a really significant career change without also altering your social and professional circles to some degree. Think about it. Your existing network, your closest colleagues, your mentors, the strong ties that bind you, they're often deeply invested in your old identity. They knew you when, they saw your past successes within that identity.
Like the example of Harris Roberts trying to make an entrepreneurial leap.
Exactly. He found that his 5 senior mentors, people he respected immensely, were actually acting like a fence, subtly blocking his moves towards entrepreneurship. Not because they were malicious.
No, they probably thought they were helping him.
Precisely. They were giving him advice based on the successful corporate identity they knew and the risks they understood from that perspective. They were trying to steer him back to the safe, known path. So making a big change often requires consciously distancing yourself, at least somewhat, from these strong ties that might hold you back.
And seeking out different kinds of connections.
Yes. Seeking out what sociologists call weak ties. People maybe on the periphery of your network or entirely new peer groups. These people don't have a preconceived notion of who you ought to be. And these weak ties can be surprisingly powerful. They often provide the crucial new ideas, the outside information, and maybe most importantly, the emotional permission you need to start testing out a new version of yourself.
Okay, so whether we're talking about a huge corporation trying to survive major disruption or an individual trying to successfully navigate a big career pivot, It seems like the underlying requirement is resilience,
Right.
that capacity to absorb a shock, learn from it, and ideally emerge stronger. How do we actually build that capacity at an organizational level, especially since all these adaptive strategies we've discussed rely on people feeling safe enough to take risks, to experiment, to maybe even fail sometimes?
That's the perfect link.
Yeah.
Because organizational resilience is more than just, bouncing back after a crisis. It's really the ability to anticipate challenges, to adapt effectively, and yes, to recover, but also to emerge stronger and more capable than before. And the absolute core foundation that allows an organization to truly operationalize adaptation, to thrive continuously in uncertainty, it boils down to the team culture. Specifically, it requires psychological safety.
Psychological safety, or PS, that term gets thrown around a lot lately. It's become a bit of a buzzword. So let's define it really precisely based on the research. What is it fundamentally? And maybe just as important, what are the key differences between psychological safety and just general trust within an organization?
Okay, great question. Psychological safety is defined specifically as a shared belief held by members of a team that the team environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. That interpersonal risk part is crucial.
What does that mean in practice?
It means having the confidence that your teammates, your colleagues, your boss will not embarrass you, reject you, or punish you for speaking up, for admitting you made a mistake, for asking what might seem like a dumb question, or for suggesting a risky, maybe half-baked idea that might actually fail. It's about fostering candor without people fearing negative personal consequences.
Okay, and what is it not? Because I think that's where some confusion comes in.
Right. Crucially, it is not the same thing as just general interpersonal trust. Trust is often focused more on character, like, I trust you to do the right thing. I trust your intentions. Psychological safety is focused more on the anticipated consequences of your actions within the group. I trust that this team will not punish me if I appear vulnerable or fallible. It's also not the same as just group cohesiveness or everyone being super nice to each other. In fact, sometimes highly cohesive teams, where everyone likes each other a lot, can suffer from groupthink because members are too polite or afraid to challenge bad ideas and upset the harmony. PS is really about mutual respect, combined with the confidence to take an interpersonal risk for the good of the work itself.
The research linking psychological safety directly to performance seems really compelling here. It's not just some nice-to-have soft skill. It actually drives adaptation, right?
That's absolutely the most critical finding for organizations trying to be adaptive. The research consistently shows that team psychological safety is strongly and positively associated with learning behavior within the team.
And what does learning behavior include?
Learning behavior includes actions like discussing errors openly instead of hiding them, actively seeking feedback from peers and customers, experimenting with new approaches, and feeling safe enough to question the status quo or challenge assumptions. And it's this learning behavior, fueled by psychological safety, that directly mediates successful team performance, especially when the environment is uncertain or complex.
And the research even suggests that PS is a better predictor of this crucial learning behavior than things like, say, how confident the team feels in its own abilities, team efficacy, or even how much coaching the leader provides. Why would that be?
That's a fascinating finding, isn't it? Think about it. Team efficacy, that shared confidence in the team's ability to succeed, that's mostly internal. A team can be incredibly confident, but if they lack psychological safety, they might actually be more likely to hide errors or avoid asking tough questions precisely because they want to maintain that image of competence and competence.
Ah, okay. The pressure to look good.
Exactly. They won't take the necessary interpersonal risks, admitting they don't know something, pointing out a potential flaw if they fear it will make the team look bad or make them look incompetent. Psychological safety, on the other hand, is about the belief in the external response from the group. If people genuinely believe that others will respond constructively, not punitively, when they engage in these inherently uncertain learning behaviors, well, then they're willing to actually do them. That perceived tolerance for imperfection is what unlocks the learning.
So knowing how vital it is, how do leaders intentionally go about building this kind of adaptive culture that's rooted in psychological safety? It clearly requires more than just putting up a poster that says, it's okay to fail.
Oh, much more. It really requires consistent behavioral modeling from the leadership day in and day out. Leaders have to actively create an environment where mistakes are genuinely framed and treated as learning opportunities, not as reasons to assign blame. When faced with errors, bad news, or unexpected problems, adaptive leaders need to consciously pause, manage their own initial stress or anger response.
Which is hard.
It's very hard. But instead of reacting punitively, they need to train themselves to get curious, as Amy Edmondson puts it. Get curious about what went wrong, why it went wrong, and what can be learned or done differently next time.
That level of emotional intelligence from the leader seems absolutely critical, especially when the leader themselves might feel threatened or under pressure during a crisis.
It's absolutely essential. Adaptive leaders have to model self-care, manage their own stress effectively, because their reactions set the tone for everyone else, and they need to demonstrate respectful behavior consistently. Simple things, like not interrupting people during meetings, making sure feedback is focused on the work or the action, not making it personal criticism, and crucially, being willing to admit their own mistakes or uncertainties first.
That modeling makes it safe for others.
Exactly. It facilitates the open communication that's totally dependent on people feeling safe enough to share their real thoughts, their concerns, their half-formed ideas, without fear of being judged or shut down.
And we also touched on the need for diverse perspectives to solve these new complex problems we're facing. It seems like psychological safety is the only way to actually leverage that diversity effectively.
That's a perfect point. Diversity in backgrounds, experiences, thinking styles, perspectives is absolutely necessary when you're tackling novel and complex adaptive challenges. Why? Because new solutions often require cognitive divergence, different ways of seeing the problem. But you only get the benefit of that diversity if people feel safe enough to actually voice their unique perspectives, especially if those perspectives challenge the dominant view or the status quo. By actively fostering inclusion and ensuring psychological safety for every voice on the team, leaders can truly harness the collective intelligence of the group. And that maximizes the team's and the organization's capacity to innovate and adapt. Ultimately, an adaptive culture has to prioritize learning and development as the absolute first step in preparing for future disruptions. And psychological safety is the engine that drives that learning. #outro.
We started this conversation with that image of my friend's spreadsheet fortress crumbling down around him. And I think we're ending with this really clear understanding that certainty, well, it truly is an illusion. Whether you're trying to manage a personal career or steer a huge multinational corporation through choppy waters, the only real stability seems to be found in cultivating the capacity to adapt.
And I think the most empowering insight from all of this is that adaptation isn't some magical quality you either have or you don't. It's actually a definable, learnable skill set. It requires that fundamental shift away from rigid long-term planning, which, let's face it, wastes a lot of resources when the variables inevitably change anyway.
Right.
And moving towards a much more experimental approach.
Right.
One that's built on rapid learning cycles and these low-cost probes, these experiments we've talked about.
Yeah, whether you're using something like the lean startup methodology with an MVP to validate a new business idea, or you're navigating your own mid-career change by running those small personal experiments to test out possible selves. It seems like success comes from prioritizing action over getting stuck in agonizing introspection. The most successful pivots, whether they're organizational or personal, they aren't really about finding the single right answer up front. They're more about finding the right questions to ask, and then testing potential answers quickly and learning from the results.
Absolutely. So the key takeaway for you, our listener, is really to try and embrace that experimental stance in your own life and work. Think of it as a kind of committed flirtation with possibilities. Don't wait around for some grand epiphany to strike, and try not to hold on to those old assumptions or rocks that might be weighing you down unnecessarily. The real path to personal and professional growth, it seems, isn't found in the perfect projections of a 5-year spreadsheet. It's found in that relentless, often low-cost commitment to continuous action, continuous learning, and having the willingness, the courage really, to redefine who you are and what you're capable of along the way.